Hi guys! Today I'm making a zero-waist kimono style dress and I'm making it in organza. This is my first time venturing into the organza world and I was quite nervous about this fabric as it's very slippery and I didn't think I was going to be able to iron it or anything. But actually, I really liked it and I highly recommend trying it out if you haven't done so yourself. I'm making a dress view of my zero-waist pattern Helios. This pattern has been out for quite some time, but I recently upgraded it with these two new views, a jacket view and a dress view. And the pattern is one size, but it's really easy to modify into larger or smaller sizes. The pattern actually calls for around 2 meters of fabrics for this dress. But since the silk organza I chose is a bit narrower, I drew up an alternate layout, and you can see it here on the side. I used my spare piece to make some bias binding, as I wanted to make this dress with a really neat finish inside. The fabric is so nice, I just wanted to have really high quality on the finish. So I made everything with French seams and used bias binding for the attachment of the skirt to the bodice. The fabric was actually really no problem to press at all. I started by cutting across the grain line of the fabric just to make it completely straight to start off, and I cut all of my pieces, just simple rectangles, and then you mark out your back piece where the neck is going to be. You're going to cut some angles here and fold in the neck just to make it a bit more strong. And you also mark out some angles on the front pieces to shape the bodice piece and to make some bias binding, which you're going to use later to bind the edge of the dress. When I'm cutting these angles, I use a pattern master. It's really neat to have a pattern master, as this can show you the 45-degree angle quite easily. But if you don't have one, you could also just fold in the corner and just finger press this and cut along the line you created. This pattern also calls for gussets in the armpit, but since this fabric is really It really frays easily, and I wanted to do the French seams. I figured I'd skip the gussets. They're actually there to just make the dress more durable in the underarms. But since this is more of a special occasion dress, I thought it would be okay to skip them this time. There's a lot of ways you can make a bias binding, and for this fragile fabric, I'm doing it in the slow way by making one strip at a time, sewing them together and pressing them. And when sewing in this fabric, I'm using a very thin needle, and I did some sample stitching on a little scrap piece, and I would recommend doing that to check your tension. I used a higher tension on my machine. When sewing the French seams, I use a 0.5 centimeter seam allowance, and then I trim off half of that and then press the seam open first and fold it over to the wrong side and sew again at 0.5 centimeters. On this dress you have a gathered skirt, and usually I create gathers by sewing 2 straight stitches along the edge of the fabric. With this fabric I only made 1 gathering stitch. And then you just hold on to the bobbin thread and pull the fabric along the thread to create the gathers and just spread them out evenly. It was quite fiddly to sew this skirt piece with the gathers onto the bodice. Maybe the most difficult part, as this fabric is so incredibly bouncy, but I found taking my time, and I think patience is key with this kind of fabric. On the bodice piece, you're actually going to make a notch to mark where you are placing the sleeve. But then, since this fabric is more fragile, I simply folded the bodice over and made sure the skirt pieces matched up. And instead of making a notch here, I finger pressed it. And I did the same with the sleeve, folding the sleeve in half, finger pressing, and then placing the sleeve on top of the bodice. And I did not use pins, as this will puncture the fabric, so I'm using these little clips instead. Since I'm doing French seams on this piece and it actually has a 90-degree angle in the armpit if you're not using the gussets, there is a way which is really more easy than it seems to make a French seam on a 90-degree angle. You can mark a line at 10 millimeters where your second seam is going to be. You sew your first seam almost into the corner, and then you sew it at an angle into the marked second seam. And then before you're making the second seam, you cut into this angle, into the corner almost completely. Just make sure you don't cut over your seam. And then when you're going to sew your second seam, just make sure you press these little angled pieces completely out so that they're cut into the seam allowance. Now I'm attaching the bias binding I made to the bodice to bind the edges of the front opening and to make the ties for the closure. I start sewing at the center back to ensure I have the correct length of ribbon left over on each side to tie the ribbon. When I get to the edge of the front bodice, I continue sewing over the bias binding, fold the edge in and backstitch at the end. Okay, so we're almost done. We just need to hem the sleeves and the skirt, and then we're attaching our little tie ribbons. When attaching the tie ribbons, you can lay the dress flat and place the ribbons where the front pieces match up. And it's also a good idea to pin down the ribbons and then try on the dress and see if you like the placement or if it maybe needs adjusting. I really enjoyed this project and I'm so happy I decided to do the organza, even though it was quite intimidating. I love a challenge and I hope you try this out too. And if you do, please tag me on Instagram. I would love to see your organza dress. I hope you enjoyed this video. If there's anything else you would like to see from me, please let me know in the comments and subscribe to show your support. Thank you, bye!